I'm going to demonstrate how to place an intradermal, also known as a subcuticular line of sutures. This is something to bring the skin edges together. So in contrast to external skin sutures, which come outside of the skin, this is going to be contained entirely within the skin layer. And so when it closes at the end, you shouldn't be able to see any of the sutures that are tied along the incision. It's a continuous pattern that I'm going to need to place from my dominant to non-dominant hand. So in my case, as a right-handed surgeon, I'm going to place it from right to left. I'm going to start 5 millimeters or less from the cut edge, and I'm going to pass the needle deep in the sub-Q, and then coming out superficially through the cut edge. So in other words, the deep portion is in the sub-Q, superficial portion is in the cut edge of the skin. I'm going to draw that through, and I'm going to point the tail towards the middle of the incision and then come across and do a superficial through the cut edge and come out deep, which is somewhere in the sub-Q. Most skin is too thin to do a deep and superficial layer all within the dermal layer, which is why the deep layer goes into the sub-Q. So at this point we are ready to tie, assuming that we can find that end. There we go. And so one thing to watch us tying is that you don't cross them before you tie. So I pull them back to the sides they came from so that I know where it is I should place my needle drivers in between the two. And then I'm going to pull parallel to the incision in order to tie that knot. Fourth rows is all I want in this case, because otherwise my knot's not going to bury very well. And then I'm going to cut just the short end at 2 to 3 millimeters and then move on to suturing the rest of it. In the sub-Q, people will usually take another deep to superficial bite to bury this a little bit further. In the intradermal or subcuticular layers, some people will choose to do that and some will not. My personal preference is not to do it, so it's perfectly fine if you do, but you'll see that I don't. In this case, you can start either now in on the near side or on the far side. And the way the needle is going to go through the tissue, perpendicular to the tissue. So I'm going to pull the tissue out just a little bit. I'm going to place the needle in through the cut edge and out through the cut edge. So these are both superficial bites. My needle is now pointing down the incision, so in my case it's pointing towards the animal's head. The first few bites on a subcuticular line I like to place very close together in small stitches. It helps to bring the skin together over top of the knot and buries your knot a little bit better. Once you've tied a few that are a bit shorter, you can go and get slightly longer bites. You still don't want them to be more than 5 millimeters apart in your small animal. This pattern also needs to be tightened as you go. You cannot tighten this one at the end. So I'm going to keep gentle apposition on it so that the skin edges come together. For these stitches, I go straight across and placing one bite to the next. So as I pull my sutures down, I should see a straight perpendicular line. That one I didn't get a deep enough bite, and so it pulled through the silicone. It does not tend to do that in live skin because of how much collagen we have that supports the skin. So again, I'm getting apposition as I go. And pretty soon I'm going to go ahead and bury my knot. I want to make sure I leave a good amount of space to bury knot. It's very common for early surgeons to go too far and then not have enough space to bury their knot in. So I'm going to take one more regular bite. And then I'm going to switch to doing my final knot. And somehow that came up on the wrong side of that suture, so I'm going to pass it back over. There we go. All right, So now I'm ready to go ahead and tie my final knot, and I'm going to do that in much the same manner as I buried my knot in the sub-Q at the end. I'm going to grasp the skin and place a superficial to deep bite, recognizing that the deep part is going to come out through the sub-Q layer. When I retrieve my needle, I'm going to pull this loop down. That's a superficial loop, and I don't want it to stay up. And then I'm going to go from deep to superficial on my near side. Deep again being in the sub-Q, and superficial coming out through the cut edge. I'm going to leave this loop up. This is a deep loop. It's the one that I'm going to want to tie to. It is somehow already tangled on things. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to pull it down and I'm going to rebuild because it got tangled up. So you get to see a repeat of how to go through knot burial. So one more time, I'm restarting my burial of my knot. I'm going to go from superficial to deep. And from deep to superficial on my near side. I'm going to save that loop, my deep loop, and I'm going to take one more bite on the far side from superficial to deep. So as I draw this down, what I should have is a loop on each side of the end. So when I draw this loop down, now I have a deep loop and a deep needle end, and they're immediately adjacent to each other with nothing in between. That tells me that this knot is going to bury. At this point, I could choose to do square knots, or in this case, I'm going to choose to do an Aberdeen knot. It's the preference of the surgeon, one versus the other, but I want to demonstrate both so that you have both within your surgical skill set. So what I'm going to do is take the loop and just put my fingers through it. That's a deep loop, and I'm going to grab the needle end and I'm going to pull the first loop down while creating a second loop. And then that's one. And then I'm going to do that one more time. 2, 3, making sure to snug those down, and 4. And then I'm doing this as a 4 plus 1. So I went and pulled 4 of those down, and then I put the needle end through the loop and pull that throw down as well and make sure it snugs down also. So it creates this little chain of a knot, and what that allows us to do is to bury the knot a little bit better in most cases. And so what we're going to choose to do to bury this knot is actually to go deep alongside the knot and then out superficially. And what that allows us to do is to flip the knot upside down, the little chain upside down, so that then we get the knot buried as much as possible. So I'm going to choose to go deep to it, and then I'm going to come out the skin layer, and that knot should turn over and go away, and then I'm going to cut this at the level of the skin.